Hello and welcome to Born for the Trades, a home service podcast. I am now your host today, Shreya, because Mandeep had a bit of an emergency, but I'm here with my friend Michael Munoz. He is the head coach here at Service MVP. I'm really excited to have him on today. He has over 16 years of plumbing experience at his youthful age somehow, and has experience in the field, in management, and has been using our system for over 10 years. And now we're just really lucky to have him to share all of his experience and success with technicians and managers and owners through the platform at Service MVP. Welcome to the show, Michael.
I appreciate you for having me on. I feel like it's been a long time coming. We've been talking about this for a little bit. I appreciate you making the time to have me on.
Join us as we dive deep into the world of home service entrepreneurship, interacting with industry leaders, coaches, and entrepreneurs about their experiences, challenges, and victories. Through their inspiring stories, we hope to equip our listeners with the tools and knowledge they need to succeed in the competitive home service industry. So whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out, tune in to Born for the Trades podcast for invaluable insight and real-world inspiration. This is one of the episodes I was most looking forward to, no bias or anything. Um, because I mean, we already have podcast conversations just at work talking about nerding out over processes and having the same mentor, having a lot in common, and what we do for a living and what we're passionate about. So if you can share, like, what are the things in your work life, in your career that you're most passionate about? Why are you a coach at Service MVP?
Well, it's actually a great question, because I was not looking to be a coach. I was not really looking to be a part of this. I actually had a good conversation with a friend of mine. Joe gave me an opportunity to work here, and I think it's just been so influential in my life, that has guided me, not just financially, but even how I talk to my own kids and how I give them choices, and I don't have to give them ultimatums. I can just kind of help them choose the right answer, and I don't have to be the bully dad. So I think Joe's helped me so much in my life that, I think at first I looked at it like, it was just an opportunity to just be a part of something that I loved. What I didn't know was that I was going to fall into this coaching role. And one thing that's funny, I sign off on my meetings, with telling everybody that I love them and that I appreciate them, and that, doing this job and meeting these people and giving them something that I hold dear to my heart, I think that gives me a lot of purpose in my life. And I always say I didn't know that I needed it, and now I think that it has consumed my world, where even meeting people like you, where I'm just like sucked back into it, and I love our conversations. It's like there's a lot of things going on in the world. It just seems like we never talk about any of it. We just talk about different ideas and the processes, like you were saying. Sometimes we go into like impromptu role plays, and it gives me like a little nostalgia of being back in the field. I think that's something that I miss a little bit. So,
Me too.
I think I don't know. I didn't know I was gonna be passionate about this job. I didn't know that I wouldn't even call this a job. It just doesn't feel like one. It just
I
feels like I'm
agree.
meeting with my friends and having conversations with them, and it just honestly, it just doesn't feel like a job. It feels like, God put me here for a reason, and I intend on, not wasting the talent that he gave me.
Yeah, yeah, and I would agree, and I feel the exact same way. And that's something that's really special about what we get to do is there's so much emotion, so much feeling, so much passion, and a higher purpose that has to do with we get to watch people complete their lives completely change. Maybe a Chuck in a truck, and he scales his company through high level communication. And I think people really underestimate the power of high level communication and true service in the field and get distracted maybe by the shiny things like like marketing and stuff like that. Understandable, but I kind of wanted to go back into like, I've always wanted to know this. When before you learned about Joe's system, can you talk about your experience before and after learning this type of system and what the differences were?
Well, I would say the biggest one is knowing that there is a difference. I didn't know that at the time. I just did what I was taught. And the way I looked at it is I was just going to work as hard and as long as my body can keep up with. And after 7 years and a very uncomfortable conversation with my wife, I just knew that there had to be something different. There has to be a better way. And I've always been into reading and stuff like that. Just I had a mentor. His name was Anthony Poliot, and he used to give me books. And I had most of my sales, I would say, ability came really from him, on really just like changing your mindset. And I didn't really have a process until he's the one that told me that I should sign up for this class. And I signed up for it at the time. It was a lot of money. It was like $3,500 or something like that, and it was in Braintree, Massachusetts. And I never really been away from my wife at this point. So it was like a hard thing to do, but he's never steered me wrong before. And boy, am I glad that I took his advice and signed up for that class, because I almost look at it as like two phases in my career. I look at it as those first like 7 years or so. Um, I wouldn't I wouldn't I would just consider that luck, like I was already making good money, and I would just say I have no rhyme or reason to why anybody bought anything from me.
Mm,
Um, it,
yeah,
yeah, I didn't have anything to work on or anything like that. I was the typical guy that just blames the customers or blames the situation or blames the dispatchers. I was that guy because that's what I saw around me until I went to Total Immersion and I met the famous Joe Crisara. And it's so funny and it's ironic really that I end up working here, because I can't tell you that it was like this like happy like sunny rainbow story where I was like, oh, I'm bought in. I thought it was
yeah.
weird. I thought it was awkward. I was like, there's just no way this is gonna work.
Right. It
And
seems too good to be true, and it's so different and so opposite from what we've done for so long that there's a major disruption internally that is not always like, yay, I found it right off the bat. So tell us about that. Like when you had that reaction to the training, you went ahead and used it anyway in the field. So what was that experience like there?
well, I kind of tried to like digest it in chunks. I was actually like really sick, and my graduation was terrible. Feel like Joe just kind of let me kind of skirt through it there, um, which almost like solidified that this is not that big of a deal. It's not, this is not really gonna work. Um, but I just try to digest it in chunks, right? Like it's like what part of this makes sense to me? Okay, well, that would be weeding out the competition. So I'm going to start with that. I'm going to start with, because that is something that everybody tells me at the end of the call. Well, my last guy was cheaper. You charge more than my last guy. It's like, okay, well, this one I know I could probably use. And that's what I started with was the danger line part one is what we call it. And that's where you weed out the competition. I was like, oh shit, there's something to this, because now I'm not getting this objection at the end of the call. Okay, well, what
Right,
else can
because
I
you're
add to
bringing
this?
it up at the beginning of the call, right? Just to clarify for anyone that maybe doesn't have experience with something like this.
Yeah, this is before you do your diagnosis. And then even that, to try to get creative and to put together six options, I was relying on that, on the creativity part. But the answers are right there in front of me. Joe gave it to me all along. You diagnose the whole system. You take a
Right.
look at everything. That's what good customer service is look at the whole thing. Then you don't need to be creative. You don't need the options will come to you because
Right.
you diagnose the system. And I was like, okay, well, now I'm spending less time trying to be creative and just try to like package these things just to get the options to work. Well, now I'm looking at the whole system. And then I slowly started to see the amount of calls that I was running was dropping because I was just so busy tied up with bigger jobs. I was like, okay, there's definitely something here. And after maybe about 6 months, I my like there was some very like seasoned guys there that this might not sound impressive now, but for like a plumber, we had this guy there that was doing like 100,000 a month, and this is back in 2013, maybe 2012, something like that.
Mhm.
And 100,000 a month for a plumber back then, that's a pretty good amount of money. And I was right there with them. I was like, okay, there's something to this. I think there's something here. And I just kind of dove into the process and I talked to my buddy Anthony and I said, all right, I don't know. if I'm overstepping my boundaries here, but I think we could get this guy here, and then he could just train the whole team. And that's kind of
Right.
exactly what he did.
So you
Uh,
like baby stepped into it, which I actually like that story a little bit more because it's a better influence because I feel like this is the majority. You have the experience of the majority. Not everybody is like, oh my gosh, yes, this is it, and super open-minded. They're usually a little bit more hesitant and closed-minded when they're introduced to a subject like this. So I feel like this is a huge reason why you have the effect that you do in coaching on these technicians, where something I've noticed is the technicians, when it comes to their owners or sales managers, sometimes it's common that when they're trying to train them, they are more inclined to lie about what happened on the call or just omit information because they feel like they're going to get reprimanded or in trouble or their job is in jeopardy. So something that's beautiful about you coaching them and having an outside influence like this, where you get where they're at. They know that you understand them and they trust you. I sit in on these coaching calls and I can tell that they don't lie to you. They admit, "I've really messed this part up, man. I didn't do that part." They are honest about where they fell short in the process, which is the reason why you could properly train them and help them. And on these meetings, it's like it's incredible. Like the the kind of feedback and how emotional it gets and how deeply passionate everybody is from becoming like from being a skeptical technician to being somebody that loves coming to work and is passionate about their job and is passionate about training and learning that bridge to that person. What kind of advice would you have from somebody that is trying to bridge the gap for their team? Maybe a sales manager that has a lot of technicians with the mindset that you used to have.
Well, if I can backtrack there a little bit, and I'll definitely get to that, but I definitely want to backtrack. And I think the connection comes from, I feel like we share the same pain. I always talk about this is we definitely share the same pain. Where I mean, for us as technicians, I don't know if anybody, maybe telemarketers, maybe feel the same amount of rejection that we feel on a daily basis, except they're just doing it on the phone, it's just like a quick hang up. But for
You're
us, we
spending
spending,
hours
right?
getting to know the family. It hurts. It's it's painful. Yeah.
Yeah, and it hurts on multiple levels
Mhm.
because I bought into this relationship that I thought that I was building with this client. Then they tell me that they're going to call me, and then I never hear from them. And it's like they get me every time. And then I'm using my time and resources to put into them when I could just be out doing something else. And then it almost like maybe I shouldn't do this. Maybe I should just go for the quick repair. At least I'm going to make money. And then
Right.
you're like in this gray area where it's like it's just painful.
You're
And
lost and you're controlled by your circumstances instead of you controlling your circumstances.
Yeah,
Powerless.
and that's kind of the beauty of having the process, right? Of like, okay, I can leave there, not blame the customer. I can kind of go back and do what people do with us over at iCare is they're like, hey, okay, what did I miss here? Okay, I missed this part. Ah, shoot. Okay, now let's role play that. Let me hear what that sounds like. Okay, perfect. Now I got it. Now this shouldn't happen. And if it does, well, I need a little bit more work. And I feel like the breath of fresh air that comes with taking accountability for the call, you would only have that if you have a process, because then you have something internally to work for. And I will say this to kind of answer your question there, the biggest, probably the most impactful thing is that I did have somebody like Anthony to kind of guide me through it. And then I also had obviously Joe. Joe was always available to me, and I used to come with him. Probably what seemed like the stupidest question to me, but he always just had the right answer.
Right.
And I think that right now, probably the most important thing is for the leaders to go first. So the leaders have to know what it is that the guys are experiencing and what it is that they're learning. This way they can actually help the team and give the team some type of support, not just like technical support where you're telling them what parts, but also you're kind of like on an even playing field. You're like eye to eye, kind of like I am with my coaching. I've been there, I've known the struggles. Like,
Right.
I don't think that there's a way to describe the feeling of just wanting to go home but you can't. because you were not able to communicate with anybody. You didn't sell anything all day. Nobody bought anything from you. You just had all this rejection all day, and then you still want to go home, but you can't because you didn't make any money. I think that that pain you have to live through for years,
Yeah.
um, in order to be like kind of eye to eye, and then come out the other end. And this is why I tell you, like I didn't know I was going to be passionate about this. I didn't know that that this was going to be something that I wake up, in the morning. I just can't wait to get going. But then I get these text messages. I got one this morning actually, from a client. He called me. He said, "Hey, I'm going to this call. They have multiple bids. They have one at $19,000. How do I handle this?" We kind of break it down. We role play it, and I got a text message this morning that he sold it for 34.
Yep.
And it's
Those are
like,
my favorite.
it's like the Dodgers just won the World Series right here for me.
Yeah,
Like it
it
just feels
feels
so
like
good.
I understand. It's
So
addicting too. It like gives you energy and fuels you. It's like a cup of coffee. I totally get that feeling. And this goes into the subject that's been, I want to discuss this because it's been a really hot topic on Facebook right now. And the topic is that how annoyed people are with self-proclaimed influencers and coaches in the industry that have not experienced the pains and successes of what they're teaching, which is everything that you just described, which is why you're one of my favorite coaches of all time. Because the influence and the transference of feeling and belief and influence is so strong because you have actually used this process to be successful and you've had the experience of doing it the wrong way, which makes you one of the best teachers. So what are your thoughts on something like that?
yeah, I think that again, the answers are right in front of me. You know, as much as like I say I admire Joe and all that stuff, Joe doesn't talk about how great he is and how he just knocks everything out of the park. Most of his coaching is about how he blew it and how he messed up on this call, and then
Right.
here's how to fix it.
That's how
And
he
I
learned it in the first place, right?
right?
Yeah.
And I feel like what I should have done was take his mistakes as a learning lesson for myself, but but I didn't. It's almost like I didn't realize it at the time, but I've definitely bought in now, and then I've been bought in for the past 10 years. I worked really hard to get really good at this process, and it's almost like I was so focused on myself on trying to get really good at this just because of what I could do for my family financially,
Hmm.
and then not just financially, but also the freedom of time
Hmm.
where I am being efficient with my time at work. I'm making my money while I'm supposed to be making it. And then when I say I'm going to enjoy my weekend, that means I could do whatever I want. That means
Hmm.
I can go wherever I want. I can go
Freedom.
do anything. Um, I think that, I just feel like, you know, I probably should have jumped in with both feet. I just didn't really know at the time. I feel like what we call having your mother in the truck. I think that was in there. I think I
Yeah.
was young and maybe a little naive,
I messed
but
it up too. I went to total immersion, same. I went to total immersion. But I was fully bought in, sure. I was obsessed with it the moment I got there, only because I came from a sales background probably, and I already had an interest in it, to be fair. I killed it in the field right after that, my first couple of months in HVAC, and then I started to kind of take the credit for it. That was my mistake. I made the oldest mistake in the book. I'm like, I'm going to make it my own because it's my talent that is getting this result. And I wasn't, I think naturally, I had an ego. That's what it was. My ego took over. I'm a great salesperson. I don't need to keep training. And I started to forget little parts of the process over a period of time until I only had like 50% of it instead of 100%. And then my numbers went down. I was humbled. I learned that it's not me. It's what I've learned from more experienced people. And then I went back to total immersion and I had to do it all over again to get back on track. But I think most people learn from their own mistakes, unfortunately, rather than other people. So I really understand that.
yeah, see, and that's kind of I wouldn't say opposite of how I was. I think I definitely saw like a little bit of an uptick as I put more little pieces to play or into play and into the process of the call. And I think every time, so I've been to total immersion probably 7 times or 8 times by at this point. And it's something where I was just looking for like, give me some details, give me some details. Like I was like fully committed. Once I was like, okay, wait a minute. So you mean to tell me I'm working less and I'm making more? All right,
Hmm.
I'm in.
Right.
Regardless of how I feel, I cannot deny the results. I cannot deny the money part of it. So I'm in. So I don't care how uncomfortable a magic moment feels. I don't care how uncomfortable it is to use verbal packaging.
Yeah.
I'm bought in. And the more that I bought into the system, the more that I stuck to the system, it's like when I was feeling highs, right? Like things were going great and I couldn't miss and everybody's buying, whatever it is that was on the table. Um, I did not take credit for that because what I was
Yeah.
doing was not good. And then
Yeah.
also when I was not doing well and I was stuck in these ruts, well, at least I had something to work on. I can default back to the process and see what I'm missing here.
Right.
Either way, there's a solution. It's just I never really felt like it was just me alone out there. Once I had a process that I can stick to and something that I could work with and I knew was like proven to work in front of my own eyes when I didn't believe it at first. And then I started seeing customers' responses. My reviews were like abnormally detailed.
Oh
It
my
just
gosh. Yes. Oh my gosh. I would get that's what really blew me away about the process was I would get reviews from landlords in another country managing a just crappy property they never pay attention to, replacing their system on the premium option with the most amount of service and writing a 5-paragraph review of my Zoom call with them. I it just it was much deeper than even getting the premium option. What was the most satisfying is how satisfied they were. And, it was an emotional response that I had to where I'm like, "Oh, I love this." And it's not even about the option he picked. That is super cool. But it's about, how the client's experience and what they had. And I wanted to ask you about your experience. You're talking about the results of the system. And I know you're humble and you don't like love to, talk about this too much, but I think it's important of what your experience was. What were the results, for you and your family out of a system like this, in the end?
well, so again, I wasn't necessarily focused on like the highest revenue. I was just really focused on efficiency. I was focused on my average per call and my close ratio. And I can just use those two things to kind of mark how I was doing. And I was only running 30, 34 calls, maybe a month on a high end 34. And I was working at like a 92, 96% close ratio. Sometimes I would leave one month estimate all month, and maybe on a bad month I would leave four, which is still not horrible. Um, but my average per call was around $3,700, and that to me was in the 200,000s for me personally as a plumber. And I wouldn't even say that that's like impressive. Just to me, the most impressive thing, and 100% credit to the system, being able to deal with objections and building a good connection with people. And it's almost like the customers that I lost, I knew I 100% lost those because I already knew at the end of it, after all of this, that maybe this was not the best client for me.
Right.
And it was almost like I let them go versus they let me go. And I think the most impressive part, it is as arrogant as that sounds, was just the efficiency of it all. We had
Right.
guys, I worked at this big company and we had guys, several million, like, over $1 million producers, but their close ratio was always in the 60s. And it's just kind of like a crapshoot at this point. Like, we call like turn and burn, right? Like
Yeah.
you pop it and go. That's kind of their mentality is if they don't want to buy, on to the next one. They don't want to buy, on to the next one. And I didn't really focus on that. I didn't want to be driving around all day till 10, 11 o'clock at night. I wanted to be home for dinner. I wanted to say grace with my family, and I want to, read to my kids and put them to bed. So I think the most impressive part is the efficiency that I was able to accomplish. The numbers not so much, it's just the efficiency. Like
Hmm.
I maximized every opportunity. If my average per call is $3,700, most people pick in the middle. That means no matter what call I went to, I stuck to the freaking process. I diagnosed the whole system, and those people saw options between like $10,000 all the way down to like $1,500, or $7,000 all the way down to maybe 1,000 or $1,200. But
Right,
most people ended up picking in the middle somewhere around $3,700. I think the only reason that you can put together options like that and people pick them is by having a process, is by finding all the faults in the system, is by documenting it, and then explaining to them how that impacts them in their life. And then the solutions will kind of sell themselves. And they have six solutions to choose from. I think one thing that I also learned through this process is actually, I have a theory about this. I call this my abused puppy syndrome, where I used to be so afraid of no's that as soon as the customer would kind of start to hint at a no, I would kind of be like an abused puppy where they just flinch and then I'm out the door. And
yeah,
one thing that probably the hardest obstacle really for me was getting comfortable with no's and then like going after no's. The I have six options. I'll seventh if I got to make one, and then that gives me the opportunity for at least five, six no's,
right,
before I get a yes. So I think that
totally.
was probably a paradigm shift for sure.
Yeah, and I kind of lastly, I wanted to talk about on the coaching meeting something that really like floored me about you when I started going into the coaching meetings and seeing you teach all the technicians and owners is your analogies are are immaculate. Like I've probably stolen a lot of your analogies if I like just naturally because I hear you say them all the time. You just have a way of explaining things that technicians or managers don't understand and maybe they haven't understood for a long time, but all of a sudden they fully understand as soon as they have one conversation with you. And it is because of your way to put together analogies when it comes to trades or communications or sales and make it make sense to people. One of those is verbal packaging, which that is very unique to our process is verbal packaging where it's not using technical jargon, it's using layman's terms, but in a very specific way. And it is one of the things that people at first feel very uncomfortable using this process because they're technicians and the way they describe stuff is always technical jargon. But I believe you have a doctor analogy for this subject that I've heard a couple times. I wanted you to share that on this
Yeah,
one.
I do, and you're right about that. I think most people look at when we introduce the verbal packaging, they almost look at it like, well, this is like a gotcha moment, because then the customer is going to say like, hey, aren't you just talking about a toilet, or aren't you just, and they're kind of afraid or intimidated that the customer is going to say something like that,
Because
and then
it's
they
so
feel weird.
different.
It is so different. But the best way that I can describe it that makes sense to me is to me, I consider myself a professional. So when people are like, "Hey, I don't see why we need to call it the verbal packaging. I don't see why I need to call it this," or the customer, what if they ask us this? And to me, it's very simple. It's like, "Hey, well, let me ask you this. Have you ever been to the doctor? Let's just say that you have a black eye and you get hit by a baseball or something, and then you go to the hospital. Does the doctor just tell you, oh yeah, you got a black eye, you got a bump on your head here, you got a shiner? That's not what a doctor says. The
I'd
doctor will
be
say, hey,
scared.
yeah, the doctor will say, yeah, you have like blunt force trauma, and then it's causing a contusion, and then that's you have a fracture, you have a 50% fracture on your orbital. That's what the doctor would say because he's a professional. We call
Hmm.
it black eyes because we're not professionals. So some people, no doubt about it, Treya, some people do call this a toilet, but not professionals. We call it a porcelain waste removal system because that's what it is. It's porcelain and it removes the
So
waste.
beautiful. And also with the doctor, right? Another part of that was that they take your vitals and they check other things when you're there. They don't just look at the immediate problem, but they make sure everything's okay. And that goes back into the diagnosis portion of the same
Yeah.
analogy. And I just think it's
Right.
genius.
Well, it is, and that's exactly right. So if you have a black eye and you go to the doctors, do they just say, "Hey, come on in, come sit down. The doctor's going to see you right now," And then the doctor walks in and says, yeah, here's your prescription. Oh, what do you need? Oh, you need prescriptions? Here's your prescription. All right, you're out the door. Or does it sound more like the nurse calls you in, she asks you a bunch of questions, you sit down, they check your heart rate, they check your blood pressure, they weigh you, they ask you, they stick that thing in your ear, and then they send you to the doctor. Then the doctor takes what the nurse has in her hand, and which is part of the diagnosis. She doesn't tell you any of that stuff. The doctor tells you that. He
Mm,
takes what she said, everything that she found, all the faults in the system, and then he asks you some questions, and then he puts together a diagnosis. And then with that diagnosis, then he gives you options on how you like to go about it, on what kind of uh, you know
treatments.
solution or treatment that he's going to give you.
And usually there's more stuff than maybe the immediate problem, right? If they do that diagnosis and they find more things, then they're going to offer you solutions to all of the problems or just the immediate problem alone.
Yeah,
And what should we do?
yeah,
It's like, yeah, it's so perfect. When people
yeah,
hear that analogy, I watch their faces every time you say it, because I just see the wheels turning and they're like finally completely understanding why something like this is important when maybe they were totally against it 5 minutes ago. And that's why communication is so important. It's what we teach, it's what you coach on, being able to communicate people in a way that they understand and they agree with, in that sense, with the persuasion part of it, is sales, is high level communication. And you use the same system while you're training the technicians. And I've just
yeah.
never seen anything like it personally.
Yeah, and to kind of touch on that, and we can wrap it up with this if you want, Shreya, but I personally, I have a hard time looking at this as a sales process because this is not a sales process. This is a communications degree. It
Right.
just so happens to work for sales, but this is not a sales process. This is a communications degree. Um, and this doesn't just work for sale. It happens to work for sales,
Right.
but this communication process works with your kids, it works with your families and friends, and for anybody you come in contact with. So this is something that, as much as I wasn't a believer then, I always say this: I might not be the best guy, I might not make the most money, I might not have the most impressive numbers or background, but I promise you, it'll be hard to find somebody that's more passionate about this than me. And if you do find somebody that's more passionate about this than me, we're hiring. Come be a part of Service MVP.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Of course, we got to do a part two one day because that was just so like 2% of everything that I wanted you to share and talk about. So, would you come back on another day and do a part two sometime, or what should we do?
Um, for you, Miss Sharia, and the influence you've had on my life, anything.
Thank you. And back at you. Thanks so much for coming on. And obviously, I mean, I'll see you at work tomorrow, Michael. And thanks everybody. Thanks everybody for listening in. Once again, we really appreciate your support on this podcast. You guys are awesome. We get text all the time from you guys listening to the episodes. And thanks again, and tune in next time.